Wolfless Omega carried a poisoned wolf. Through a blizzard, the Alpha King claimed her as Luna. If you die on this sled, Wolf, I am absolutely leaving you for the crows. Do you hear me? I am not hauling 180 pounds of dead weight just to be polite. Novella Thornlake spat the words into the howling wind, her voice barely a scratch against the roaring throat of the blizzard. The massive beast strapped to her makeshift travois didn't twitch. His breathing was a wet, rattling rasp that sounded too much like a death knell. "Great conversationalist, aren't you?" she muttered, leaning her entire body weight into the leather harness, digging into her chest. Just my type. Tall, dark, and comatose. The Frostlands didn't forgive weakness. It was a simple, brutal law, written in the ice that coated the trees and the bones buried beneath the permafrost. Novella knew this law better than anyone. As a wolfless, an Omega, born without a spirit animal, a hollow vessel in a world of shifters, she was considered the ultimate weakness. She had spent 22 years proving the law wrong by simply refusing to die. The storm, known locally as the White Death, had descended with supernatural speed. Novella had been checking her snare lines near the Whispering Ridge when the sky turned the color of a bruised plum and the temperature plummeted. She should have turned back immediately. She should have burrowed into her hidden root cellar and waited it out. But she had smelled it, the distinct copper tang of blood cutting through the sterile scent of ice. Curiosity was a dangerous trait for an Omega, but it was the only reason she had found him. He was massive. Even in her limited experience with the high-born shifters of the capital, she knew this wolf was an anomaly. His fur was not just black, it was a void, an absence of light that seemed to swallow the falling snow. But now, that midnight coat was matted with crimson, and he was convulsing in the snowbank, foaming at the mouth. Wolfsbane laced with witch hazel, Novella recognized the tremors. Someone hadn't just tried to kill this wolf, they had tried to torture him out of his skin. Now, 3 hours later, her legs were screaming. The wind whipped her face with tendrils of ice, stinging like glass shards. The travois, two sturdy saplings lashed together with hide, groaned over the uneven terrain. "Don't you dare give up," Novella hissed, her boots slipping on a patch of black ice. She fell to one knee, a cry of pain tearing from her throat, but she didn't let go of the harness. "I don't know who you are, but you owe me a very expensive dinner," the wolf whined, a low, pitiable sound that vibrated through the wood of the sled. It was a sound of surrender. "No," she commanded, forcing herself back up. Her muscles burned with lactic acid. "We are 5 minutes from the ravine. My cabin is just past the ridge. You hold on, or I swear by the old gods I will turn you into a rug." It was a bluff. She had never killed anything larger than a rabbit. Novella was a scavenger, a healer of sorts for those too poor to afford the royal alchemists. She survived on scraps and wit. But right now, dragging this stranger through hell, she felt a strange, fierce possessiveness. He was broken. She was empty. It felt like a cosmically arranged meeting. The wind howled louder, a physical blow that nearly knocked her flat. Visibility was zero. She was navigating by memory and the feel of the terrain beneath her soles. The cold was seeping through her worn parka, seeking the heat of her core. "Almost there," she gasped, her breath freezing on her scarf. Suddenly, the wolf seized. The massive body thrashed against the bindings, nearly tipping the sled. Novella dropped the harness and scrambled back, falling onto the snow next to him. "Hey! Hey, stop it!" She grabbed his muzzle with her bare hands, ignoring the biting cold. His eyes were rolled back, showing the whites, and black veins were pulsing visibly beneath the fur of his neck. The poison was peaking. Novella ripped a pouch from her belt. It contained a paste of crushed star moss and charcoal, a crude absorbent she used for food poisoning. It wouldn't cure him, but it might buy him an hour. "Open up!" she demanded, prying his jaws apart. His teeth were razor-sharp, capable of snapping her wrist like a twig. She didn't hesitate. She shoved the paste onto his tongue, massaging his throat to force him to swallow. His jaws clamped down. Novella didn't pull away. She stared into his glazed, frantic eyes, projecting every ounce of stubbornness she possessed. "I am not afraid of you," she lied, her voice steady over the wind. "And I am not afraid of this storm. Swallow." For a heartbeat, the beast went still. The amber irises focused, sharpening with a terrifying intelligence. He swallowed. Novella slumped back, exhaling a cloud of steam. "Good boy." She retied the harness, her fingers numb and clumsy. The cabin was close. She could feel the shift in the air pressure near the ravine. She put her head down, grit her teeth, and pulled. She pulled for the wolfless girl who had been told she was nothing. She pulled for the wolf who was currently dying. She pulled because the storm wanted them both, and Novella Thornlake had a serious problem with authority. The cabin was little more than a hunter's shack, reinforced with clay and stone, buried halfway into the side of the hill to insulate against the biting frost. To Novella, it was a palace. Getting the wolf inside had been a nightmare of physics and leverage. She had essentially rolled him onto a blanket and dragged him across the threshold, kicking the heavy oak door shut against the screaming wind. Silence fell like a hammer. The only sound was the crackle of the dying embers in the hearth and the wolf's labored breathing. Novella didn't rest. She couldn't. She stripped off her wet outer layers, shivering in her thermal tunic, and immediately stoked the fire, feeding it dry birch until the flames roared to life. She turned to her guest. In the firelight, he was even more terrifying. He took up half the floor space. The heat of the room was triggering the shift. Shifters couldn't maintain their animal form when their core temperature fluctuated this wildly under duress. "This is going to be messy," she whispered, grabbing a bucket of water and a rag. The transformation was agonizing to watch. Bones cracked and realigned with wet snaps. Fur retracted into skin. The muzzle shortened, the spine straightened. Novella turned away to give him a semblance of privacy, though she kept a knife within arm's reach. A wounded animal was dangerous. A wounded man was often worse. When the sounds of shifting stopped, replaced by a human groan, she turned back with a blanket in hand. She froze. The man lying on her rug was a landscape of scars and muscle. He was stark naked, his skin pale as moonlight, contrasting with the dark, wet hair plastered to his forehead. But it wasn't his nudity that stopped her breath. It was the tattoo etched into the skin over his heart. A crown of thorns wrapped around a howling wolf. Novella dropped the blanket. Oh, gods! She hadn't just rescued a wolf. She had rescued a member of the Royal Guard, or worse. That sigil belonged to the High House of Frostborn. He was an enemy. The Frostborns were the ones who had instituted the utility laws, declaring that wolfless Omegas were to be stripped of citizenship and relegated to servitude. Because of his family, she lived in a shack. She should kill him. It would be easy. One slice across the throat while he was weak. The man's eyes flew open. They were the same striking amber as the wolf's, burning with fever and violence. He surged upward, his hand shooting out to wrap around Novella's ankle. His grip was iron. "Assassin!" he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Nurse!" she corrected sharply, hiding her fear behind a mask of annoyance. "And if you don't let go, I'm going to kick you in the face!" He blinked, the aggression faltering as pain washed over him. He collapsed back onto the floor, but his hand didn't release her ankle. It slid down, his fingers trailing over her boot, seeking an anchor. "Where?" "Nowhere. Safe," Novella said, crouching down but staying out of striking range. She tossed the blanket over his lower half. "You were poisoned. Wolfsbane and something else. Something synthetic." Iestyn, he muttered, the name dripping with venom. The wine. Novella's mind raced. Iestyn Moorheart, the Duke of the Southern Vales. This was high court treason happening on her living room floor. Drink this. She held a clay cup to his lips. It contained a tea made of willow bark and a rare, pungent root she called kingsfoil. Ironic, considering the circumstances. He turned his head away. Poison. If I wanted to kill you, I would have left you in the snowdrift, Novella snapped. Or I would have stabbed you 5 minutes ago while you were shifting. Drink the damn tea. He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the frayed edges of her tunic, the scars on her hands from skinning game, the defiant set of her jaw. He saw a peasant girl ordering a predator to heal. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was terrifyingly handsome. Bossy, he murmured. He drank. For the next 6 hours, Novella fought the Reaper for his soul. The fever spiked so high his skin radiated heat like a furnace. He thrashed, hallucinating battles and betrayals. He spoke of the void and the hollow crown. Novella pinned him down with her body weight. Wiping his brow with snow, she melted in a pot, forcing water down his throat. At the darkest hour of the night, he stopped shivering. He went unnaturally still. Novella pressed her ear to his chest. His heart was beating, slow, strong, and rhythmic. The black veins in his neck had receded to faint grey lines. He was going to live. Exhausted, Novella slumped against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. She watched him sleep. In repose, the harsh lines of his face softened. He looked less like a monster and more like a man who had carried the world for too long. "Who are you?" she whispered to the shadows. As if in answer, the wind outside died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. And then a sound broke through the quiet, a sound that chilled Novella's blood faster than the storm. Howls. Not the wild, chaotic howls of timber wolves. These were synchronized, disciplined, hunting. They were looking for him. Novella didn't wait. She scrambled up, dousing the fire with a scoop of ash to kill the smoke. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the frost-rimed window. "Wake up!" she hissed, shaking the man's shoulder. He woke instantly, no transition from sleep to wakefulness, just 0 to lethal alert. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully. "They're here," she whispered, wincing. "Your pack." He listened, his head cocked, the amber eyes narrowed. "Witshaw, my general. Is that good or bad? It depends on who gave him his orders." The man tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The poison had been neutralized, but his muscles were jelly. Novella caught him, grunting under his weight. He smelled of sweat, pine, and the underlying scent of immense power. "We need to hide," Novella said. "There's a root cellar beneath the—" "No." His voice was firm. "If Zevran is here, hiding makes me look guilty. Help me to the chair. You can barely stand." "I am the king!" he growled, the command vibrating in his chest, hitting Novella with a force that nearly made her knees buckle. "Put me in the chair." King. The world tilted on its axis. Novella stared at him. This wasn't just a Frostborn. This was Xyla Frostborn, the Alpha King, the tyrant of the North, the man who signed the laws that made her a non-person. She was holding the architect of her misery in her arms. "You," she breathed, her hands trembling. "Me," Xyla acknowledged, his gaze hard. "Now get me to the chair, Wolfless, or we both die." She should drop him. She should let the soldiers break down the door and find him helpless. But the survival instinct that had kept her alive for 22 years kicked in. If he died here, she would be blamed. She was the convenient scapegoat, the wolfless witch who poisoned the king. She hauled him to the rough-hewn wooden chair facing the door. He collapsed into it, arranging his limbs with a regal grace that defied his exhaustion. He pulled the blanket over his lap, hiding his nudity, and rested his hands on the armrests. "Open the door," he commanded. "They'll kill me," she said, backing away. "Not if you stand behind me." Before she could argue, the heavy oak door exploded inward. Splinters rained across the room. Novella screamed, diving behind Zyla's chair. 3 massive wolves barreled into the room, shifting mid-air into armored warriors. Swords were drawn, the steel gleaming in the moonlight. Leading them was a man with a face like a hawk and eyes of cold steel. Zevran Witshaw, the royal beta. "Secure the perimeter!" Zevran roared. His eyes landed on Zyla, and relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by confusion. Then he saw Novella peering over the back of the chair. The look of disgust on Zevran's face was visceral. "A null? You found shelter with a null, sire?" Zevran stepped forward, raising his blade toward Novella. "Step away from the king, filth. If you have touched him with your cursed hands—" "She carried me," Zyla said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped Zevran dead in his tracks. "Sire, I was poisoned. Moorhart's vintage," Zyla said, his fingers gripping the armrest until the wood creaked. "She dragged me through the White Death. She purged the toxin." Zevran lowered his sword an inch, looking from the king to the trembling Omega. "She is a wolfless, sire. It is illegal for her to even be in your presence without a collar. She likely poisoned you herself to play the hero." "She saved me!" Zyla roared. The effort cost him. He coughed, clutching his chest. "We must get you to the Citadel," Zevran said urgently, signaling his men. "The healers are on standby. As for the girl—" He looked at Novella with cold indifference. "She is a loose end. We cannot have rumors that the Alpha King was weak enough to be nursed by a genetic defect. Eliminate her." One of the soldiers moved toward Novella. She didn't scream. She reached for the knife in her boot. She would not die on her knees. "Touch her!" Zyla's voice dropped to a subsonic growl that rattled the jars on the shelves. "And I will rip your throat out with my human teeth." The room froze. An alpha protecting a wolfless was unheard of. It was madness. Zyla forced himself to stand. He swayed, and Novella instinctively reached out to steady him, her hand gripping his forearm. The contact sent a shockwave through the room. A wolfless touching the king. Zevran looked horrified. "Sire, the optics!" "I do not care about the optics, Zevran. I care about the debt." Zyla looked down at Novella. For the first time, the amber eyes weren't calculating. They were burning with something possessive. He looked at her, not as a savior, nor a servant, but as a discovery. "She comes with us," Zyla declared. "As a prisoner?" Zevran asked, sheathing his sword slowly. Zyla looked at Novella. He saw the fire in her eyes, the knife in her hand, the sheer, unadulterated will to survive against a world designed to crush her. He saw the woman who had shouted at a blizzard for him. "No," Zyla said, and a dark, terrifying smile touched his lips. "She enters the Citadel under my protection." He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, his voice a secret just for her. "You dragged me to hell and back, Novella. Now let's see if you can survive my court." He straightened, addressing his beta with a tone of finality that rang like a bell. "Prepare the carriage. The king is returning, and he is bringing his Luna." Silence, absolute and suffocating, filled the shack. Zevran's jaw dropped. Novella stopped breathing. "Sire," Zevran whispered, "you cannot claim a wolfless. It is monstrous." "Then let them call me a monster," Zyla said, leaning heavily on Novella, his weight a promise and a burden. "Move." As they stepped out into the dying storm, Novella looked up at the man who had just painted a target on her back the size of the kingdom. She had saved his life. In return, he had just handed her a death sentence wrapped in a title. She was the Luna of the Frostborn. And she didn't even have a wolf to howl with. The carriage that arrived to transport them to the ice citadel was not a carriage at all. It was a fortress on wheels, pulled by 6 dire elk with antlers spanning 6 feet across. Inside, the air was thick with tension, smelling of crushed velvet, stale blood, and the ozone scent of suppressed magic. Novella sat on the edge of the plush leather seat, her knees pressed together, her hands gripping the edges of her worn tunic. Across from her, King Xylar Frostborn sat with his eyes closed, his head leaning back against the squabs. Even in exhaustion, he radiated a terrifying kind of gravity. His chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled rhythm, a testament to the discipline keeping him conscious. Next to the door sat Zevran Witshaw, the royal beta. His hand never left the hilt of his sword, and his gaze never left Novella. It was a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. To him, she was not a savior. She was a bacteria that had somehow infected the host. "Stop staring at me," Novella said, her voice raspy from the dry heat of the carriage. "I didn't ask to be here." "If you had any honor, you would have refused him," Zevran said, his voice a low growl. "You are bringing shame to the House of Frostborn. A wolfless Luna? It is blasphemy." "Zevran," Xylar said without opening his eyes. The single word was a whip crack. The beta clamped his mouth shut, though his jaw muscles feathered with tension. "The laws you uphold say I am nothing," Novella said, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "They say I am a utility, a tool. Well, your king was broken, and this tool fixed him. If that's blasphemy, then your religion is stupid." Xylar's lips quirked upward, the ghost of a smile returning. He opened one eye, the amber iris glowing in the dim light. "She has teeth, Zevran. You would do well to remember that." The carriage shuddered as it hit the smooth, paved roads of the capital. Novella risked a glance out the window. The ice citadel rose from the frozen tundra like a jagged black tooth. It was a monstrosity of obsidian and enchanted ice, towering into the storm clouds. It was beautiful, oppressive, and utterly alien to a girl who had spent her life in a mud-walled shack. When they arrived, the courtyard was swarming with guards. Novella expected to be thrown into a dungeon. Instead, Xylar gripped her arm the moment the door opened. "Do not let go," he murmured, his voice tight with pain. "Walk beside me, not behind. Beside." Stepping out was like stepping onto a stage. Hundreds of eyes, servants, guards, courtiers, fixed upon them. A ripple of shock went through the crowd as they saw the Alpha King, pale and blooded, leaning heavily on a woman in rags, a woman with no scent. "The king returns!" Zevran bellowed, trying to salvage the moment. Xylar ignored the fanfare. He marched Novella through the massive double doors, through the Hall of Echoes, and straight toward the royal wing. Every step was a battle. Novella could feel the tremors in his arm, the heat radiating from his skin. He was running on fumes. They reached a set of mahogany doors guarded by elite sentinels. Xylar shoved them open and collapsed onto a sprawling fur rug the moment they were inside. "Get the healers!" Zevran shouted from the hallway. "No!" Xylar rolled onto his back, gasping. "No healers. Not yet. They answer to the council, and the council answers to money." He looked at Novella, his eyes desperate. "Lock the door." Novella didn't hesitate. She slammed the heavy bolt home just as footsteps approached. "You're paranoid," she said, kneeling beside him. "I'm alive," he corrected. "There is a difference." He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her cheek. His skin was scorching. "They will try to separate us. They will take you to the preparation chambers. They will try to scrub the peasant off you. Do not let them break you. I've survived winters with no fire and summers with no water," Novella said, checking his pulse. "I can handle a bath." Xylar gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. The intensity in his gaze made her breath hitch. "It is not just a bath, Novella. They will try to strip away who you are. They want a doll. I need the woman who shouted at the wind." A knock pounded on the door. "Sire, the physician is here." Xyla released her, his expression hardening into a mask of stone. "Let them in. The game begins now." Novella unlocked the door. As the medics swarmed in, pushing her aside, she felt a cold hand of dread grip her heart. She was alone in a castle full of wolves, and the only person who wanted her alive was currently unconscious. Xyla was right. It wasn't just a bath. Novella was escorted by 3 stone-faced handmaidens to the sanctum of purification. They stripped her of her tunic, her only possession, and burned it before her eyes. They scrubbed her skin with stiff brushes until she was red and raw, muttering about mongrel stench and filth. They washed her hair with oils that smelled of chemically induced lavender, trying to mask the scent of nothing. That was the problem with the wolfless. To the shifters, they didn't smell bad. They smelled like a void, like a mannequin. It unnerved them. By the time they were finished, Novella was wrapped in a gown of silver silk that cost more than her entire village. It was backless, exposing the sharp ridges of her spine and the scars she had earned survival. The handmaidens tried to cover the scars with powder, but Novella pulled away. "Leave them!" she snapped. "If the court is going to eat me alive, they should know the meat is tough." She was summoned to the grand hall for the evening feast. It was less a dinner and more an execution waiting to happen. The doors opened, and the herald announced, "Presenting the companion of His Majesty." He couldn't bring himself to say Luna. The hall was cavernous, lit by floating chandeliers of blue crystal. Long tables were packed with the nobility of the Frostlands, dukes, duchesses, alphas of minor packs. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, musk and rain, the pheromones of powerful wolves. When Novella entered, the silence was deafening. She walked the long aisle alone. Her chin was high, her steps measured. She didn't look at the sneering faces. She looked straight ahead at the high table. Xyla was there. He looked magnificent and terrifying. He had been cleaned up, dressed in a tunic of black velvet embroidered with silver thread. He sat on the obsidian throne, looking bored, but his eyes tracked her every movement. To his right sat a man Novella recognized instantly from the descriptions in the village gossip. Iestyn Moorheart, the Duke of the Southern Vales. He was beautiful in a way that made your skin crawl. Golden hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that didn't reach them. He was sipping wine. The same wine, Novella realized with a jolt, that had nearly killed the king. Novella reached the dais and curtsied, clumsy, stiff, but defiant. "Rise," Xyla said. His voice was stronger now, bolstered by whatever stimulants the medics had given him. "Sit beside me." A ripple of outrage went through the room. The seat beside the king was for the Luna. "Sire," Iestyn purred, his voice like warm honey. "Surely there has been a mistake. The kitchen staff eat in the scullery." Laughter rippled through the hall. Novella froze. She looked at Iestyn. She saw the malice in his eyes. He wasn't just insulting her. He was testing Xyla's weakness. Novella bypassed the chair and walked straight up to Iestyn. The hall went silent again. She was small compared to him, a rabbit standing up to a fox. "Lord Moorheart," she said, her voice clear. "I wouldn't speak so loudly if I were you. The stress might exacerbate your condition." Iestyn blinked, his smile faltering. "Excuse me." The yellowing of the sclera, Novella pointed to his eyes. The slight tremor in your left hand, holding that goblet. And the scent? She leaned in, sniffing the air theatrically, though she couldn't smell magic. She was bluffing based on what she saw. "You've been dabbling in nightshade alchemy, haven't you? trying to build an immunity. Yestin's glass rattled against the table. The colour drained from his face. Nightshade was a restricted substance, often used by assassins to inoculate themselves before handling poisons. "That is a lie," Yestin hissed. "How dare a wolfless—" "I am a healer," Novella interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I pulled your king back from the brink of death because I know exactly what poison looks like. And right now, my lord, you look toxic." She turned and sat in the Luna's chair. The silence in the room was absolute. Xyla didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched Yestin, whose face had turned a mottled shade of red. "An amusing parlour trick," Yestin spat, recovering his composure. "But accusations require proof, little girl." "Proof is for courts," Xyla said. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. He stood up. "I am the king. My instinct is the law, and my instinct tells me that I like her." He placed a hand on Novella's shoulder. It was a claim, a warning. "Let us eat," Xyla commanded. The tension broke, replaced by the clatter of silverware, but the air remained charged. Novella looked down at her plate. Her hands were shaking beneath the table. She had just publicly humiliated the most powerful duke in the kingdom. "You have a death wish," Xyla whispered, leaning close to her ear under the guise of passing the bread. "I hate bullies," she whispered back. "He will kill you for that." "He tried to kill you first," she said, looking up at him. "I figure we're even." Xyla looked at her, and for a moment the mask of the king slipped. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "You are going to be the death of me, Novella Thornlake." "Only if you don't finish your vegetables," she retorted. The banquet was a marathon of subtle insults and political maneuvering, but Novella survived it. When it finally ended, Xyla didn't send her to the guest quarters. He marched her straight to the royal suite, his personal chambers. The rooms were vast, dominated by a massive fireplace and a bed large enough for a pack. The moment the heavy doors closed, Xyla slumped against the wood, the facade of strength crumbling. "Help me," he groaned, sliding down to the floor. Novella was there in an instant. She caught him, guiding him to the rug before the fire. "You overexerted yourself. You should be in bed." "I can't," he gasped, clutching his chest. "If I show weakness—" "Yestin strikes. The council. They are watching like vultures." "Let them watch," Novella said, unbuttoning his tunic to check his heart rate. "You need rest. I need you." The words hung in the air, heavy and intimate. Xyla looked at her, his eyes fever-bright. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Why did you do it?" he asked softly. "In the hall, you challenged him." "Because he hurt you," Novella said simply. The truth of it surprised her. She didn't know this man. Not really. But seeing him in pain triggered a fierce protectiveness she couldn't explain. "And because he looked at me like I was dirt." "You are not dirt," Xyla whispered. "You are the only real thing in this entire castle." He pulled her closer. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. Novella's hands rested on his bare chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart, the heart she had restarted. "Xyla," she warned, "you're delirious." "I am perfectly lucid," he murmured, leaning in. His lips brushed hers, tentative, questioning. It wasn't a demanding kiss, it was a plea. Novella hesitated. This was the king. This was the enemy. But he was also the man who had stood between her and a sword. She closed her eyes and kissed him back. It was like touching a live wire. The kiss deepened, hungry and desperate. For a moment, there was no blizzard, no poison, no politics. Just the fire and the man who tasted like winter and blood. A sharp crack echoed through the room. They broke apart instantly. Novella scrambled back, her heart hammering. The sound had come from the window. A small, jagged hole had appeared in the reinforced glass. On the floor, embedded in the stone, just inches from where Xyla's head had been, was a bolt. A crossbow bolt, made of black silver. Down! Xyla roared, tackling Novella to the floor. He shielded her body with his, a low growl rumbling in his chest. They waited, frozen, for a second shot. None came. An assassin? Novella whispered, shaking. Xyla reached out and pulled the bolt from the floor. He examined the tip. It wasn't coated in poison this time. It was wrapped in a small scroll. He unfurled it. Novella peered over his shoulder. The message was written in blood. The wolfless cannot hold the crown. Surrender her, or the pack will feed. Xyla crushed the note in his fist. His face transformed. The lover was gone. The Killer King had returned. "They think they can threaten me in my own bedroom," he snarled. "They aren't threatening you," Novella said, her voice trembling but clear. "They're threatening me." "It is the same thing," Xyla vowed, pulling her to her feet. He went to the wall and pulled a hidden lever. A panel slid open to reveal a rack of weapons. He grabbed a broadsword and tossed a sleek, silver dagger to Novella. She caught it, the metal cold against her palm. "What is this?" "If you are going to be my Luna," Xyla said, his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying promise, "you need to stop acting like a healer and start thinking like a hunter." Iestyn didn't act alone. That bolt came from the inner courtyard. Someone let the assassin in. "Who?" "Someone close," Xyla said. "Someone with a key." He walked to the window, staring out at the storm that raged eternally around the citadel. "We are going to find them, Novella. And when we do—" He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "We are going to make them wish they had died in the blizzard." Novella gripped the dagger. She looked at the note on the floor, then at the man who was ready to burn the world for her. She was trapped. Trapped in a castle of ice, hunted by wolves, and falling in love with a monster. "Okay," she whispered. "Teach me how to use this." The crossbow bolt still lay on the obsidian table, a grim centerpiece to a war council that had been running in circles for 72 hours. The royal suite, usually a place of luxury, had been transformed into a tactical bunker. Maps of the ice citadel were plastered over the velvet wallpaper, pinned with daggers and quill tips. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the ozone tang of suppressed aggression. King Xyla Frostborn had not slept. The fever from the poison was gone, but in its place was a cold, predatory focus that was infinitely more terrifying. He paced the length of the room, his movements sharp and agitated, like a caged tiger waiting for the keeper to make a mistake. Novella sat at the table, her hands stained with ink. She had been mapping out patrol routes, cross-referencing shift changes with the timing of the assassination attempt. She looked up as Xyla slammed his hand against a schematic of the ventilation shafts. "We cannot trust the guard," Xyla snarled, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The bolt came from the inner sanctum. That isn't just a breach, it's an invitation. Iestyn has turned someone inside the perimeter, someone with high-level clearance." "Or," Novella said, her voice calm in the center of his storm, "someone was threatened. Coerced. Loyalty is strong, Xyla, but fear is stronger." She picked up the silver dagger he had given her, testing the edge against her thumb. It was a nervous habit she had developed in the last few days. Zevran Witshaw stood by the heavy oak doors, his arms crossed over his chest. The royal beta had been unusually silent since the attack. He watched Novella with a complex expression, suspicion warring with a grudging, baffled respect. She hadn't fled when the bolt struck. She hadn't cowered or begged for a carriage to the border. Instead, she had armed herself and gone to work. To a wolf who valued strength above all else, Novella's resilience was a confusing variable. Adrian Goldheart, Zevran spoke suddenly, the name dropping into the silence like a stone. Xyla stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his amber eyes narrowing. The captain of the Western Watch? He has served my family since he was a pup. He taught me how to hold a sword. He has a sister, Zevran said, his gaze dropping to the floor. Merelda. She is wolfless. She vanished 2 weeks ago from the lower ward. We assumed she had run off with a trader, but Iestyn has been acquiring leverage. We found records of a carriage leaving the Goldheart estate at midnight, heading for the old alchemy labs. Novella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty castle. He's kidnapping the wolfless? Why? We have no magic. We have no shifts. We are useless to someone like Iestyn. To experiment, Xyla growled, the temperature in the room dropping noticeably. Frost began to creep across the window pane. Iestyn has always been obsessed with the biology of the bond. He believes the wolfless are a genetic mistake that can be cured or exploited. If he is taking them, he is looking for a biological weapon. A way to break us. We have to find them, Novella said, standing up. Her chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. If Adrian is the traitor, he knows where Iestyn is holding them. He's the key. Adrian is currently overseeing the supply run in the lower ward, Zevran said, shaking his head. But the area is swarming with Iestyn's private militia. They are claiming it's a security exercise for the upcoming solstice ball. No wolf can get close without being smelled a mile away. If we send a squad, they'll kill the hostages before we breach the door. Xyla slammed his fist onto the table, cracking the wood. Then we are blind. I am the king of the north, and I cannot walk through my own castle without triggering a trap. No, Novella said softly. You are blind. I'm not. Both men stopped and looked at her. I have no scent, Novella reminded them, stepping into the light of the fireplace. To a werewolf, I'm a ghost. I'm a void. I can walk right past a guard dog, and unless he sees me with his eyes, he won't know I'm there. I can slip through the cracks you can't fit through. Absolutely not, Xyla snarled, moving instantly to block her path. His sheer size was overwhelming, but Novella didn't flinch. I did not drag you from the snow and fight off death itself just to send you into a viper's nest as bait. You didn't drag me anywhere, Your Majesty. Novella stepped into his space, tilting her head back to look him in the eye. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling the frantic, angry rhythm of his heart. I dragged you, remember? Across 3 miles of ice. And right now, you are a king under siege with no eyes. I am the only asset you have that Iestyn can't track. Xyla stared at her, his jaw working. He wanted to lock her in the highest tower. He wanted to burn the world down to keep a single hair on her head from being harmed. But he saw the steel in her spine, the same steel that had defied the White Death. He realized with a jolt of terror that he couldn't stop her. She was not his subject to command. She was his equal to trust. 1 hour, Xyla whispered, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. If you are not back in 1 hour, I will tear the lower ward apart, brick by brick. I will unleash every soldier I have, and I will not care who sees the monster. Deal, Novella said, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering. Zevran stepped forward, unclasping his heavy, fur-lined cloak. Take this. It is treated with scent-masking oils, pine and ash. It will hide the smell of the lavender soap the handmaidens used on you. It will make you smell like a shadow. Novella took the cloak, surprised by the weight of it. She looked at the beta who had wanted her executed days ago. Bring them home, Zevran said gruffly, looking away. And try not to die. The king would be unbearable. Novella slipped into the shadows of the citadel, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The lower ward was a labyrinth of steam tunnels, servant quarters, and storage vaults, a city beneath the city. She moved like smoke. The cloak Zevran gave her was heavy, but it blended perfectly with the gloom. She stuck to the walls, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the damp stone. She passed patrols of Yestin's men, hulking brutes with yellow eyes and drawn swords. She held her breath as they passed inches from her, their noses twitching, sensing nothing but the damp cold and the smell of ash. The power of being unnoticed was intoxicating. For her entire life, her lack of a wolf had been a curse, a mark of shame that made her invisible to society. Now, it was her superpower. She found Adrian Goldheart in the back of a vast supply warehouse, hidden behind crates of winter grain. The captain of the Western Watch looked nothing like the proud warrior Xyla had described. He was pacing, his uniform disheveled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was muttering to himself, tearing up documents and feeding them into a small brazier. Novella didn't announce herself. She used the noise of the burning paper to mask her approach. She stepped out of the shadows and pressed the tip of her silver dagger to his kidney. "Don't turn around," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "And don't reach for your sword, or you'll be bleeding out before you hit the floor." Adrian froze, his hands hovering over the fire. "Who? I am the Luna," she said, the title tasting strange but powerful on her tongue. "Tell me where Yestin is keeping your sister. Tell me where the Wolfless are, or I let the king loose on you." "Merelda," Adrian's voice broke, a sob tearing from his throat. He slumped, not trying to fight. He promised he wouldn't hurt her if I just left the door open. He said he just needed samples. "Where is she, Adrian?" "The alchemy labs beneath the South Tower," Adrian stammered, shaking violently. "But you can't go there. It's too late. He's not just experimenting. He's harvesting." "Harvesting what?" "Adrenaline." "Fear," Adrian whispered. "He's draining them to make a serum." "There is always a choice," Novella said coldly, though she felt sick to her stomach. "Go to the king, confess. It's the only way you survive the night." She reversed the dagger and struck him hard behind the ear with the heavy hilt, a trick she'd learned from a tavern brawl in her village. Adrian crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Novella turned to leave, needing to get this information to Xyla immediately, but she paused. Pinned to the crates Adrian had been guarding were detailed schematics. She squinted at them in the dim light of the brazier. They weren't just maps of the prison. They were diagrams of the Citadel's central ventilation system, and attached to the diagrams were crates filled with vials of a glowing, viscous green liquid. She picked one up. The label was handwritten in Yestin's elegant script. "Concentrate 49, Feral Aerosol." It wasn't just a coup. Yestin wasn't trying to replace the king. He was trying to break the entire species. He was going to gas the castle during the solstice ball, driving every shifter into a permanent, mindless killing frenzy. He would reduce the sophisticated court of Frostborn into a pack of rabid animals, and then he would rule over the ruins. Novella grabbed the vials and the maps, shoving them into her tunic. She had to run, she had to scream. But as she turned, a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind her. A heavy hand, smelling of expensive cologne and rot, clamped over her mouth. "I told you she was clever," a silky voice whispered in her ear, sending ice into her veins. Novella struggled, kicking out, but the grip was immovable. Yestin Moorhart stepped into her view, smiling his terrible dead smile. He wasn't alone. 6 of his elite guards emerged from the gloom, surrounding her. "Hello, little ghost," Yestin purred, tightening his grip until her jaw creaked. "You're just in time for the main event. I was wondering who Xyla would send. I must say, sending his pet was a bold move." He plucked the vial from her hand. "Careful with that. It's very volatile, just like you. Novella woke to the sound of screaming. She was bound to a high-backed iron chair in the center of the grand ballroom. The room, usually a place of music and celebration, had been transformed into a theater of horrors. The solstice ball had begun. The hall was packed with hundreds of guests, the dukes, the duchesses, the pack alphas, the elite of the Frostlands. But there was no music. The doors were barred, and from the intricate brass vents along the floor, a heavy green fog was hissing into the room. Iestyn stood on the royal balcony overlooking the hall, safe behind a glass partition, wearing an intricate gas mask. He looked like a grotesque insect god observing an ant farm. "Wake up, my dear!" Iestyn's voice boomed over a magical amplifier. "Watch the end of an era." Novella struggled against the ropes, but they were woven with silver wire, burning her skin. She looked around. The gas was waist-high now. The guests were coughing, stumbling. But it wasn't killing them. It was stripping them. A duchess near the front fell to her knees, clawing at her throat. Her eyes rolled back, and when they snapped forward again, the intelligence was gone, replaced by a yellow, predatory hunger. She didn't shift fully. She remained in a half-state, a monstrous hybrid of human and wolf. She lunged at the man beside her, tearing into his shoulder with her teeth. Panic erupted. It was a chain reaction. As the fear spiked, the gas worked faster. "It's a concentrated form of the feral frenzy," Iestyn explained to Novella, his voice conversational. "It bypasses the rational mind and triggers the primitive hindbrain. No logic, no loyalty, only hunger and dominance. This is what they are, Novella, underneath the velvet and the crowns. Beasts." "You're insane!" Novella screamed, the sound raw in her throat. "You're destroying your own people." "I am purifying them," Iestyn shouted back. "And when the dust settles, I will be the only one with the antidote. I will be the shepherd to a nation of wolves." "Where is he?" Novella screamed, tears streaming down her face as she watched the carnage below. "Where is Xyla?" "Oh, he's here." Iestyn pointed to the far end of the hall. "He's late, but he loves a dramatic entrance." The massive double doors groaned under an immense impact. Wood splintered. The iron hinges shrieked. "He's coming for you!" Iestyn laughed, a cold, jagged sound. "But by the time he breathes this air, he won't know you. He will tear you apart, Novella. And that will be the poetic end of the legend of the Luna, eaten by her own king." The doors exploded inward, sending shards of oak flying like shrapnel. Xyla charged in. He was fully shifted, a massive, terrifying shadow of black fur and muscle, larger than any wolf in the room. Zevran was beside him in wolf form, flanked by the loyal remnants of the guard. They were a wedge of disciplined fury, ready to save the court. Then they hit the wall of gas. Novella watched in horror as Xyla faltered mid-stride. He skidded across the marble floor, shaking his huge head. He sneezed, snarling, trying to shake the fog from his senses. But the gas was potent. The intelligence in his amber eyes began to flicker and die. The tactical awareness vanished, replaced by a red, blood-mad haze. His fur bristled, doubling his size. "Xyla!" Novella screamed, straining against her bonds. The sound of her voice seemed to confuse him. He whipped his head toward her, baring fangs that dripped with foam. He didn't see his mate. He didn't see the woman who had saved him. He saw movement. He saw prey. Iestyn cackled from the balcony. "Kill her, king of beasts. Show them what you really are. Show her that nature always wins." Xyla charged. He covered the distance in seconds, a blur of lethal intent. The other wolves scattered before him, sensing an alpha in peak rage. Novella didn't close her eyes. She didn't look away. She stopped struggling. Panic would only trigger his prey, drive further. She forced her breathing to slow, forced her heart to stop frantic drumming. She looked straight at the monster rushing to kill her. "Xyla," she said, her voice dropping to a calm, commanding register that cut through the screams of the dying court. "Heel!" The command was swallowed by the roar of the chaos, but Xyla slowed. He didn't stop, but he hesitated. He slammed into the chair, his momentum knocking it backward, but he didn't bite. He loomed over her, his hot breath washing over her face, smelling of blood and ozone. He growled, a sound that vibrated in her very bones, his jaws snapping inches from her throat. "I know you," Novella whispered, leaning her forehead against his wet, matted snout. She ignored the razor-sharp teeth. She ignored the monster. "You are not a beast. You are a man who loves winter. You are the king who was carried. Come back to me." Xyla trembled. His whole body shook as the chemical imperative to kill fought against the soul-deep bond he had forged in the snow. The red in his eyes fought with the amber. "Look at me," she commanded, pouring every ounce of her will into him. "I am your Luna, and I am telling you to stop." On the balcony, Yestin stopped laughing. He pounded on the glass. "Kill her! Why aren't you killing her? It's impossible!" Novella saw the movement. She looked up and saw the vial of blue liquid, the antidote attached to Yestin's belt. She couldn't fight Yestin. She was tied to a chair. But she had a weapon, the most dangerous weapon in the room. "Xyla," she whispered, shifting her gaze to the balcony. "The man up there. He hurt me." The words cut through the feral haze like a diamond knife. Hurt her. Xyla's head snapped up toward the balcony, his ears flattened. The growl that tore from his throat wasn't the sound of a mindless beast. It was the sound of a vengeful god. He didn't use the stairs. He launched himself off a marble pillar, claws digging into the stone, scrambling up the vertical wall with defying physics. He was a black thunderbolt fueled by pure, protective rage. Yestin scrambled back, fumbling for his sword, but it was too late. Xyla crested the balcony railing, shattering the glass partition. Novella didn't watch the end of Yestin Moorhart. The sounds were enough. A wet crunch, a terrified scream that was cut short, and then silence from the balcony. Moments later, a blue mist began to rain down from the ceiling vents. Xyla had smashed the antidote into the ventilation system. The effect was immediate. The growling in the hall subsided. Wolves collapsed, shifting back into naked, confused humans. The madness receded like a tide. Xyla, human again, but naked, and covered in blood that wasn't his, dropped from the balcony. He stumbled toward Novella, his legs shaking. He didn't say a word. He slashed her ropes with a single swipe of his remaining claw, then collapsed into her arms. He buried his face in her neck, shivering violently. "I almost," he choked out, his voice broken. "I almost tore you apart. I wanted to. The gas. It made me want to." "Shh," Novella rocked him, ignoring the carnage around them, ignoring the stares of the recovering court. She ran her fingers through his blood-matted hair. "I'm here. I'm safe. We survived. You came back." Zevran limped over, clutching a nasty wound in his side. He looked at the dead body of Yestin hanging from the balcony, then at the wolfless girl holding the Alpha King together in the center of the slaughterhouse. Slowly, painfully, Zevran went to one knee. He bowed his head low, exposing his neck in ultimate submission. "My queen," he rasped. One by one, the surviving wolves, shaking off the madness and realizing who had truly saved them, looked at the woman who had not flinched. They knelt. Novella looked out over the sea of bowed heads. She didn't feel like a queen. She just felt tired. But she held Xyla tighter, knowing that the real work was just beginning. The thaw came 2 weeks later. The ice citadel was still repairing the damage from the night of red snow, but the atmosphere had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, tentative hope. Novella stood on the balcony of the royal suite, watching the sun glint off the melting icicles. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue, the color of the House of Frostborn, but she wore her old leather boots underneath. "You look like you're planning an escape," Xyla said, stepping up behind her. He looked better. The shadows under his eyes were gone, and the scars from the poison had faded to white, but he still moved with a careful grace, as if he were handling something fragile. "I was thinking about the laws," Novella said, not turning around. "The utility laws." "They are burned," Xyla said. "I signed the decree this morning. The Wolfless are citizens, full rights. Reparations are being paid to the families Yesten targeted. It's not enough to just burn the paper, Xyla." She turned to face him. "People hate what they don't understand. They hate us because we remind them that they are part animal, and we are not. We are the mirror they don't want to look into." "Then we change the reflection," Xyla said. He took her hands. "Zevran has petitioned the council to allow Wolfless into the Royal Guard. He says we need spies who can't be tracked. He calls it the Ghost Division." Novella laughed, a genuine bright sound. "Zevran? Really? He has become your biggest fan. It is annoying, actually." Xyla smiled, but his eyes grew serious. "There is one more thing, the claiming ceremony." Novella stiffened. "The biting?" "No." Xyla shook his head. "That is the old way, the way of possession. I do not want to possess you, Novella. You saved me because you were free. If I bind you to me with magic, I lose the very thing that makes you... you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't gold or diamond. It was a band of polished black wood, inlaid with a single shard of raw, unrefined crystal from the cave where she had first dragged him. "This is not a collar," Xyla said softly. "It is a promise, a partnership. Be my Luna. Not because fate demanded it, or because of a bond we can't control. Be my Luna, because you choose me." Novella looked at the ring. She looked at the king who had learned that strength wasn't about how loud you could howl, but about who you were willing to bleed for. She thought of the blizzard. She thought of the silence of her own soul, which she had always thought was empty, only to realize it was just quiet enough to hear the truth. "I choose you," she whispered. Xyla slid the ring onto her finger. He didn't roar. He didn't announce it to the kingdom. He simply kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of spring thaw and new beginnings. Below them, in the courtyard, the wolves were howling, but for the first time in history, the sound didn't make Novella feel alone. It sounded like a song, and she knew the words.